Welcome to the CIC. In this edition, I'm going to talk about having just returned from seeing the Marcel Duchamp show at MoMA. It's been a few weeks since it's been up. I've been hearing reports from it from friends, and now I get to see it for it myself. I went with a friend of mine, Ledoux, and it was great having him along because he was able to translate for me many of the French titles that are abound in the exhibition. And much of Duchamp's wordplay seemed to be so important that I felt fortunate that I was able to have Gwenelle come with me and show me what was just below my threshold of understanding. Now, the question I have walking into the show is, what more can we learn from Duchamp? What did the curators of the MoMA show, what did they have to show us that we haven't seen before? And I think it's two things. One is the early paintings. There were two initial galleries chock full of his early work. And it's always interesting to see an artist's early work, especially an artist of the stature of Duchamp. And personally, I could see why he switched off of painting and switched the game up that played to his strengths. Which is to say that I didn't think he was a great painter. My friend Gwenelle disagreed with me, and he saw qualities that he appreciated in the work. So I'm not the only person in the world that, of course, has such an opinion, but I think there are others, and the work, you could tell that I project that he didn't feel like he was completely on his game, and he was constantly outshone by others, of course, and it wasn't surprising to me that he would want to switch it up and change the game to his advantage. And what was his advantage? You could see that advantage in the early work, because many of what would be his later preoccupations that he's famous for, the large glass, his final work, both works are in Philadelphia, where the show will next travel, which I think is probably the location where it should have originated, because these two works could not leave Philadelphia. And so what we have in MoMA are allusions to and facsimiles of these two great works. So, but what do we see? We see his thematic development. That was yesterday's recording, and what I did was I went to the exhibition again today, and I wanted to see it a little bit slower and take in much more of the content of the exhibition, and map out the sequence of galleries so I can describe it well for you guys. So what we have here are, in the exhibition, three great rooms. One is what I call the big room, which contained the ready-mades and Rose C'est la Vie, which is the content of that room. A second room, great room, was the green box, which was an interpretive guide for the large glass, and the box in a valise, which archived it, and then the last great room, which was called replication, which I'll describe in a bit. But going through, before the first great room is preceded by three galleries. One called Swimming Lessons, which is half of which are his illustrations for a humor magazine when he was young. the second room was titled Painting in Motion, which involved his trek through Cubism, his adventures with using chess as a motif, and his dalliance with Futurism. And then another room, another gallery, before we arrive at the first great room, which is entitled Around Large Glass, which involved change and repetition, concentrated thematic development of the bride in her bachelor's even. And then we arrive at the first great room, which I've described, which was the ready-mades and Rose Levy. After that was precision optics, which was his research into kinetic art, and involved a lot of very careful draftsmanship and construction. And then after that, we arrive at a very dimly lit room that dealt with the green box, which was an interpretive research guide for the large glass, and the box in a valise, which he archived his work. If I remember correctly, there are 69 altogether that he created, and a portion of those were in this room. Everything under glass, everything to be protected, and again, the dim light was to protect the valuable, fragile paper pieces in the room. And then after that, we go into another gallery called Creative Acts, and it was the thematics of that room was the recovery of his ready-mades in the 40s and 50s. Ready-mades of which he had done many years, decades beforehand, and then left to be lost apparently to posterity, only to be recovered again through reconstruction. And interesting. And then we arrive at the final great room, which was entitled Replication, in which in a way he was cashing in, and why not? Early in the 40s, mid-40s, and into the 50s, his reputation, his career was getting traction, and people were asking for the early works which could not be recovered. And since they're ready-mades, he ready-made them again. After that room was a final gallery entitled Retrospection, which features his Étant Données, which translates into English as given. The mysterious room which he denied the public access to for decades, I guess, and he worked on his installation. And it's mainly a documentation of that. Way. So I've got this new camera, and I'm still learning how to use it, and I did not use it to its best effect in this outing, but you'll see little snatches here and there of me trying to grab Guinel's translations of the French commentary and titles throughout the show.
Des points sommets construire un cercle en It's not to read. Transcrire sur le cercle la disposition géographique plane des sommets. Enfoncer le caoutchouc en cône et photographie dans les 7 positions des tamis. Wow.
Right.
Putting that in music. So this is like all the directions of what something is supposed to be doing, like a drawing is supposed to faire une empreinte, marquer des traits, put down an imprint and trace a figure on the surface, imprint un seau seal in a cire, how do you call that? Wax. Imprint a seal in wax. What is this? These are a set of instructions just on the other one. And maybe he's putting that in music. So he was really like watching out,
But sets of instructions that are not unlike the kind of instructions you'll find in a mechanical drawing or an architectural.
Absolutely. Right. Yeah.
It's amazing how many things that he synthesized at once, allegorically.
Right.
The mechanical age. Being on trains and airplanes.
Right. Literature as a set of instructions.
Being rejected.
Well, I don't think that comes
his
into
love life.
play there.
I think everything comes into play.
No, I think the rejection is really like separate, Oh, but you're right. Maybe actually this came out of the rejection. There's another one. Perspective drawing for the water mill wheel. So here we go, another technical drawing of a machine.
It was interesting to me that Guenel's conclusions were that they are hard to translate in the sense that they are nonsense in French. They are they use a lot of alliteration. And when you try to derive any kind of, let's call it poetic value out of them, you're not going to get what you typically would expect from a poet. It's something else. It's another category altogether, which is not to dismiss it, but is to say that it is beyond the grasp even of a native French speaker, which is interesting to me. Guenel did not depreciate the value of these things, but I just found it interesting that they resisted any kind of translation, and when they were in their native language, the nonsense was not nonsense on the level of poetics, where it delivered you to imaginative other places. But they were complex and they were self-referential and they were quite amused with itself, with Duchamp himself and the construction of these things. But I guess they were strong enough in order to carry the titles of these works and a kind of, I'll call it quasi-poetics that is, I think, essential to Duchamp's body of work. So I want to, in the second trip, carefully track his development of his thematics. In his early 20s, he provided illustrations for humor magazines, which I think must have been and was quite a significant mark in his life. He was charged with this, the humor and the illustrations themselves, which was very interesting to see. His graphic, I wouldn't say prowess, because there is rather straightforward and simple, and you could see in the works a use of what we would call airbrush today. He would mask out parts of his drawings and probably aspirate ink to provide an airbrushed section, and then reinforce that with ink and over pencil underlay. So that was interesting to me that he kind of retained a bit of that and in his later work. Through all this through 1910s, 1912. I mean, we're talking about a couple of years in which he marched through the exemplars of the great artists that were surrounding him, imitating them, learning from them presumably, and then moving past them, because painting was not his jam. he wanted to focus on the conceptual, of course, legendarily. In 1911 to 1912, he was developing his nude descending the staircase, which was a pivot away, and he developed the thematics of the standard stoppages, his chance derivation of his own special kind of metric. The irony, of course, is complete Duchamp. We could see early on the developments of The Bachelors, The Bride, The Chocolate Grinder, which is rather astounding when we're tracking the years that these things were created. 1911, I'm speaking of, 1912, and rapid development as well, which is a kind of a burst of activity. And it was kind of since he flowered into himself all at once, kind of supernova-like. And that alone, I think, is worth the price of admission into this exhibition. Then there was a shadow period from the 20s to 1946, and then you could extend that to 1963 when he had his retrospective in Pasadena. During that shadow period, early on in the 20s, he was basically just sort of percolating. He was developing these thematics until he arrived into this period of popularization, 1946 to 1967, thereabouts. I mapped out the thematics in his early work. First one I wrote down was exclusion, being the odd man out. There's a drawing called, it was a painting, one of his early paintings in his 20s, titled Saint Sebastian. Another one, Le Carin, stood up, being the thematic of being stood up romantically, I assume. Another drawing called Rejection, it was, the thematic is rejection. The painting was Sad Young Man on a Train, nude sketch in parenthesis. And all this was all about being excluded, I think, was an abiding concern for him. I think one of the interesting details of his biography is that his brothers excluded him in an exhibition in the Paris Salon. He was excluded later as a cubist by French painters Glazes and Metzinger, I think the names were, that were on the board with him in the independent salon, and that must have ground his frustrations. Another thematic was the issues of accident, of fortunate accidents, I would assume. Another thematic was trans, which later became Rose c'est la vie, but was presaged by a painting called Neither a Man or a Woman, Not Even an Avrignac, which I'm really not sure what Avrignac meant. I looked it up on Google Translate and I got nothing. A painting from 1909. Another thematic is his prowess in graphic arts. Prowess is a word I wouldn't use. A lot of graphic artists, their chops are really incredible. But whatever chops he had developed, he used extensively and relied on it a great deal. And what do I mean by that? A sharpened pencil, rulers, circles, ellipses, the ability to use the compass and ruler, and that seemed to come naturally to him, and he used it in the development of his themes that would later arrive in the large glass. Then there was the concern with popular machines. There were a couple of paintings, drawings that reflected his astonishment, presumably, for railways and for airplanes. But where he grounded it was not on this sort of extreme levels, more impressive, let's say, achievements in technology, but on prosaic ones, on the coffee mill, which I understood was a project that one of his brothers asked him to do, or his brothers to do, which each would develop a small painting that he would include in his kitchen. And Duchamp's, Marcel's contribution was a painting of the coffee mill. And what was interesting about that is that he retained that painting and revisited it over and over again later on, and included it in his box and a valise. And so these things return. They're developed. They're retained, kept very precious. And he mined himself and mined these influences that a lot of other people, a lot of other artists would probably move past and walk away from. Maybe I'm speaking for myself. A lot of things in my past, I sort of like been there, done that, and I'm doing other things. Not for Duchamp, who is revisiting and carefully nursing these early achievements and developing them into further art projects. And then there's chess. His famous concern with chess in the exhibition begins with a painting of chess players, and but we see it over and over again. Maybe not developed, incorporated into signature works, maybe, but was an abiding concern, and I think informed his decision to incorporate the essence of chess into his artistic expression, which involved strategy, planning, a sequence of actions, which in a way prefigured a lot of conceptual art, in the sense that this idea of art as a set of instructions that Solo Witt would later bring to its glory was deep in the nature of chess itself. Curiously, he anthropomorphized the chess pieces in a few paintings, and which was a very light suggestion of sexualization or just denuded figures, that the chess pieces were active agents and not just instruments of strategy, but they were, for him, personalities, they were individuals, they were monads. So in the second large room, here's some of my notes on that. The green box and the box in a valise, the dark room at the heart of the exhibition. What we have in the 1920s was a choice over craft, which was a sculpture by another name, that he was finished with art, but was rehearsing himself. He researched himself. And what we have is Duchamp, the auto-archivist, super sticky. Nothing that he dwelt on was disposable to a waste bin of history. He digested himself. He composted himself, compost as in, and he grafted himself. So that was kind of fascinating, a tribute to the exhibition. It was a great insight. There was no such thing as detritus for Duchamp in the works that he made. He made certain that nothing, no idea, even if scribbled on a scrap piece of paper, was disposable. Nothing in his life that way was trivial. We are delivered to a kind of room that I've heard other friends describe as a kind of IKEA or Walmart, which is kind of it was described that way to me in criticism, in a way that that suggested that maybe Duchamp shouldn't be delivered to a mass market kind of feeling of this room. A room full of ready-mades. The center of this room is a facsimile of his large glass without cracks. And it was made by, who is the guy who made it? Richard Hamilton, which in 1961, I think, so thereabouts, he recreated the large glass without cracks. It's interesting to see it in this room without the cracks. It is a kind of washed feeling. Everything's kind of rinsed. They're made to feel like consumer objects, which I would now agree with my friends who said that it felt like some kind of Walmart warehouse or some kind of, to give it a better patina, an IKEA level showroom. All it missed was a kind of price list where you could, mark the items that you would want to have shipped to your home or something like that. It was kind of funny and strange. And in the last gallery, the États Donnés, which he began in secret in 1946 and developed it for a great number of years. He began that curiously, simultaneously, with the ramp up of his popularization. Just as he was becoming remembered and noticed, and the clamor for his work started to simmer and then bubble, he started to hide at the same time, which is very interesting. It was kind of a scissors action in his disposition to the art world. He buried a subterranean self at the very moment that he sprouts. Here, and also a film, last film made of Duchamp. It's a silent film, a room that was too brightly lit to have a projection. So the projection itself was very hard to see, and there could have been technological means, I think, in order to make that more vivid, because I think in a show like this you would want to feel like you're in the same room as Duchamp. And technology today, there's a multitude of things. It's interesting that they chose to leave it in what I think was the 60 millimeter film, which made a lot of noise in that room, and the image it delivered was so dim. A bit frustrating to see. So yes, this is the Marcel Duchamp exhibition. This is CIC. These are my first impressions. Those are my conclusions at the second viewing of the Marcel Duchamp show in MoMA. And maybe a future dentist will add to this in the spring of 2026.